Good afternoon and welcome to the Health and Care Professions Council. My name is Natalie Berrie. I'm the Registration Manager within the Registration Department and currently responsible for continuing professional development, which I'll be referring to as CPD throughout my presentation. Firstly, thank you all for joining. I hope you'll find this presentation useful and, if anything, quite reassuring. So what I'll be discussing today, I'll go over briefly who we are as the HCPC, which I'm sure you are fully aware of. I'll just touch upon that, and the rest of the presentation will be focused on CPD. So I'll be looking at what is CPD, our 5 CPD standards, the CPD audit process, audit outcomes and deferrals, and questions and answers. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. And if we have time, I may stop in the middle of the presentation just to take a couple of questions. If you do have any questions, you can put this in the Q&A part of the Teams function, and I can then obviously answer some of the questions. If we do have a high volume of questions, then there may be some we need to take offline, but we'll see how we go. So I'll just kick off first of all, just briefly covering off who we are. So we're an independent UK-wide statutory regulator. Our powers derive from the Health Professions Order 2001, and essentially we are here to protect the public. So as you can see, that it says there to safeguard the health and well-being of persons using or needing the service of registrants. And just to clarify, we are a separate role from professional bodies and trade unions. However, we do work very closely with them, in particular professional bodies. And we are overseen by the Professional Standards Authority, the PSA, who I refer to as the regulator of the regulators. So just before I kind of go into more around CPD, we are a multi-professional regulator. As you can see here, we do have 15 different professions on our register. And you'll see that the renewal opening and renewal deadlines can differ between professions. We do have some professions coming up for renewal, and at that time is when they would be selected 2.5%, randomly selected at the time of the renewal opening. So you will see that clinical scientists, prosthetists, orthotists, speech and language therapists will all be soon going into renewal, and we'll have 2.5% per profession selected for audit. The deadline for renewal and CPD will be the 30th of September this year. So I'm just going to talk about the standards that make up the register. First of all, you can see our standards of education and training. These are the standards that deem which courses are approved, UK approved courses, which some of you may be well familiar with if you've gone via the UK route. This enables you, if you do complete a course successfully, to register and become registered on the register as a health professional. Our standards of proficiency are in place for each profession. If you have applied because you may have qualified outside of the UK, for example, and you went via the international route, we would have assessed, obviously, your skills and knowledge against our standards of proficiency to ensure you do have those relevant threshold skills and knowledge to come onto the register as that profession. And the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, these are general standards across all of our professions, and essentially they make up what we would expect of you as professionals. And lastly, there you can see the CPD standards, and obviously this is what we'll be focusing on today. So what is CPD? Essentially, CPD I always refer to, it's around keeping your knowledge and skills up to date to ensure you are working safely and effectively and ensuring that fitness to practice. Especially, obviously, you may qualify, and as you know, within your profession, things are changing all the time. So it's about keeping up to date and keeping up to speed with things to ensure you work safely. CPD is kind of relevant to your scope of practice. So we know we have 15 different professions, and yes, you may share the same CPD standards, but you all do very different roles. And even within professions, people carry out very different roles. So it's about thinking about what CPD is relevant to your practice, and we'll speak more about that soon. CPD is outcomes based, so we don't ask for a certain amount of points or hours. We feel that there's more gain in kind of having you reflect on your CPD and thinking about CPD activities that work best for you and that you can gain something from as a part as opposed to kind of trying to gain points now as to an exercise that you may not find you've learned anything from. And then self-directed and self-managed. So what this means is there's no official formal sign-offs by managers or anything along those lines. We do trust you as registrant that you are carrying out your CPD, and you are managing that and ensuring you do continue to meet our CPD standards, which we ask you to declare each time you renew your registration. So standards for CPD, I am now going to just move into running through what each standard is. And then I'll be linking this through to, if you are selected in the profile, how you demonstrate you meet these standards. So hopefully you will find that useful. So standard 1 is around maintaining a continuous, up-to-date and accurate record of your CPD. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's completely up to you how you keep record of your CPD, but you must ensure that you do keep a record of your CPD over, obviously, the period of the 2 years. So the reason why I've just put up an example here, this is a very brief example, but what we have here is a learning activity, a date, and you may want to also include a learning outcome, so some reflection points. You'll see here that your CPD may be that it was on a particular day, or it may have been over a duration of days, and you can obviously state that in your profile if you are selected. The level of detail is relevant to your needs. So I don't know about you, but I don't really remember what I maybe done last week, so never mind kind of 2 years ago. So it's really important that you note down your CPD, not just for if you are selected, but it's good for you to reflect back on your learning throughout the years. And as I said, there's no perfect way. So it may be that you have an Excel spreadsheet or you've actually signed up to a portal that's available maybe via your professional body or an independent portal. We don't endorse or recommend any portals in particular or systems that you can use. So it is just thinking about what works best for you. But the main thing is, I know how busy working life can be, but it is just about putting some time aside to try and record your CPD and keep on top of it. And it also will alleviate a lot of that stress if you are selected, because you won't be kind of scrambling around trying to figure out dates and what you've done, maybe 18 months ago. So yeah, just to bear that in mind. So that's around standard 1. So just moving into standard 2. So this is about demonstrating that your CPD activities are a mixture of learning and also relevant to your current or future practice. So there's 2 parts to this essentially. I mean, it's ensuring you're doing a mixture. And what we mean by a mixture is, I'll just go into the next slide and bring up the activities and the different types of activities. So you'll see here we have work-based learning, professional activity, formal education, self-directed learning, and also other. Now, I have just taken a few examples that we have, but on our website, we have a much more extensive list of CPD activities, and it's just to get you thinking about the different types of CPD that you can be doing. So a lot of people think, oh, CPD, it's a fancy course I attend and I get a nice certificate at the end. I mean, by all means, that can contribute to your CPD, but that's not the only way you can be doing your CPD. So things like in-service training, reflective practice and work shadowing all form part of your CPD. Professional activities, so it could be some mentoring that you're doing, or maybe some professional body involvement. And then we have formal educational, and as I say, this is the one that normally stands out for people, is around courses, conferences and research. And then we have self-directed, so things like reading journals and books and internet research. And then under there, I've just put other as like something maybe voluntary work that allows you to pull on your skills and knowledge. But I would like to stress this is just a very brief example. As I say, within our CPD booklet and on our website, we have a much more extensive list. So if you get anything from this, it would be good to start thinking about, what CPD you've been doing and ensuring you are doing a mixture. Don't worry too much about thinking, oh, I've done this piece of CPD, which section does it fall into? Because you may find there is a complete overlap. There could be some formal learning that's work-based. There could be kind of some professional activity, but it's more self-directed. So you might find that they're overlapping in terms of kind of the categories I've stipulated here, and that's absolutely fine. But the reason we have this as a standard is because we are mindful you can only learn so much from doing kind of one type of activity. We learn in many different ways. And then the other part is obviously ensuring it is relevant to your current or future practice. So what we mean by future, it may be that you have a job role coming up, or you're doing some additional responsibilities, and therefore your CPD you might be doing now might be preparing you for something coming up in the future. So that's just around standard 2, and hopefully that's just giving you some clarity of what's expected. So I'm just going to move into standards 3 and 4. I've grouped these together because essentially this is the part in which you are ensuring that your CPD that you carried out does contribute to the quality of your practice and service delivery. So there is a benefit to your practice and service delivery there. And also that you seek to ensure that your CPD benefits the service user. So just touching upon the word service user, we do get asked quite a lot, well, who is my service user? And what I tend to say is it's anyone that is impacted or affected by your practice. So it could be if you're, I'll give you some examples just to get you thinking. So if you are, for example, a frontline paramedic, it may be the patients that you're seeing, that you're going out and seeing. It could also be your colleagues that are working alongside you. If, for example, maybe you are a speech language therapist and you're working within a university in academia, then it could maybe be that you know, your service users are your students, and again, your fellow peers as well. So it's thinking about anyone that is impacted by your service. So I know we have some professions who don't actually interact with anyone directly, and they may work, for example, in a lab, you know, maybe a biomedical scientist, for example, clinical scientist. And what we would say is think about your end service user. So who would be impacted if something went wrong? So it could be a patient that you don't actually interact with, but obviously if things did go wrong, they would directly be impacted. So just think about who is impacted by you, and that will definitely, you'll start to see you probably have more than one service user. So types of evidence. So I've touched upon this because when I move into standard 5, you'll see that a part of standard 5 is that evidence is provided. Now, what we normally say, I'll talk more about this when I go into the profile, you know, how to put together your profile. But if you are selected, we're not asking you to write up about all of the CPD you've done in 2 years, because that would be a massive task. So we don't want you to do that. But what we would want you to do is to pick maybe 4 to 6 different activities and a mixture, and talk about them. So reflect and think about how did it benefit you and how did it benefit your service user. And in that, we would then ask that you evidence those 4 to 6 pieces of activities that you talked about. So it could be that you've chosen to do something along, well, for example, you know, coming along to this today and watching this is all part of your CPD. So, for example, we will send the slides out to you after, and it could be that your evidence is a slide that are provided after this, along with some of your reflection notes following, obviously, you watching this presentation. For example, materials produced by yourself. So it may be that you actually done a presentation to, I mean, if you're in a manager role, for example, you may have done it to your team, and your members of your team or your service user. And again, you've delivered a presentation. So it could be that you provide some of that presentation as your evidence. Induction for materials for new staff, things like business plans, and even things around showing that you've reflected or evaluated your work and maybe what you've done differently following that. So even things like handwritten notes, personal development plans, anything along those lines. Again, I do want to point out, I've just kind of picked out a very few examples of evidence, but there is a much longer list on our website and within our CPD booklet. Just moving into standard 5. So essentially standard 5 is upon request that you do present a written profile. We don't mean by any means handwritten. It's just essentially capturing that if you are selected, you do need to engage with the process. It's not optional. And it must be obviously your own work. That doesn't mean that you can't have support from your colleagues, for example, your manager. And it may be that you know someone that has been selected for CPD and met the standards, and they may well give you some advice. They may well share their profile with you to view, and that's absolutely fine. We really encourage that actually, but essentially your profile does need to be your own work. Explaining obviously how you've met the CPD standards. So just to give you a bit more information of how the selection works. So at renewal, as mentioned, we do run a completely random selection of 2.5% of those invited to renew. And again, this is, as I say, completely random. There are some exceptions in that if you've not been on the register continuously for 2 years, you won't be in that audit pool, because we want to obviously give you a sufficient amount of time to ensure you can provide enough CPD. And additionally, if anyone's in a fitness to practice matter, that obviously would take priority and they would not be in that selection pool either. Or if someone's still in an outstanding CPD audit from a previous audit for whatever reason, they would not be included in that. But everyone else would be put in the pool for that random selection. Those selected must submit their CPD before the end of the renewal period. So the deadline would be the renewal deadline. You get 3 months to complete your profile. And profiles are reviewed by HCPC partners. Just to explain, there are CPD assessors, that's what we refer to them as. And I would just like to explain that they are on the HCPC register, and there will be at least one from your profession auditing and reviewing and assessing your profile. So we tend to 9 out of 10 times will put both from your profession. So if you're a physiotherapist, for example, it's more than likely you'll have 2 physiotherapists reviewing your profile. But because you share standards with other professions, it could be that at least one is from your profession, and we may combine another profession to assess the profile. What I would like to point out as well is that our CPD assessors can be audited themselves, which has happened. Of course, they don't assess their own work, I can assure you of that, because that would be a complete conflict of interest. But yeah, just to let you know, they are on the register just as you are, and they do have to meet the same standards as you do. So before I move into the CPD profile and just kind of how to put your profile together if you are selected, I'm just going to ask what I should have done, and I should have introduced, I have got a few of my colleagues on the call with me today, so apologies, I should have mentioned that at the beginning. So I have Becky Glass and I have Steve Nicol from our communications department, and I also have Alex Murnoffs, who is the team leader responsible for CPD. So I am joined by a few of my colleagues today, which is great. So I'm just going to refer probably to Becky just to see if there's a couple of questions coming that I could maybe answer now, just so I'm not I know there's a lot of information to take in, so I'll probably break it up a bit with questions. So Becky, do we have any questions come in?
Yeah, we do. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. So we've been seeing your questions come in, and we've been answering a couple of them, but there's a couple that are outstanding. So Nat, one of them is whether there's an app that you recommend to collate all of the information in one place.
Yeah. Okay, I'll probably answer that one first then, Becky. So yeah, as mentioned, we don't actually recommend or endorse. There's many CPD apps. I know there's new ones popping up all the time, and I know professional bodies, a lot of them provide excellent online systems for CPD. We don't recommend or endorse any of them in particular. It is kind of what works best for you. I mean, generally, I do get good feedback from the ones that are provided by the professional body. So, you know, by all means, if it's something you've not looked into, you may want to reach out to your professional body and see what they can offer you in terms of a CPD online system. But as I say, it's not necessary and it's not part of the requirement. So if you choose not to have any of these apps or systems, you know, that's absolutely fine as well. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of what works best for you, but we don't actually endorse or recommend any in particular.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nat. Secondly, just before we go on to the next question, a lot of these, if we're not able to answer them, because we are going to get quite a few, we'll be able to answer them in a sort of post-event communications afterwards. So just to say that if your question is not answered, asked and answered, apologies. The next one I think would be good is, how do you know if you've been selected for audit? Is it just an email?
Okay, thanks, Becky. So we've finally kind of moved in with the times, and we've moved CPD online. So I don't know if I've got anyone joining us today, but that's been previously selected. But prior to, I think it was August 2019, it was a case of if you were audited, we would send you a letter in the post, and you would then have to either email your profile or post it. So quite old school ways there. So now we've moved online. We now have an online, the registration portal, which you can renew on, and also if you're selected, you can submit your profile. And within that, we send communication via email and letter for the initial selection. So we want to reach out to you and say you've been selected. Most communication after that, so any reminders and things like that, tend to just go via email, and we do have some SMSs actually going out as well as reminders. So yeah, we've definitely got with the times now, but I must stress that it's really important that you keep your contact details up to date with us, because as much as we will try to write to you via post and email you for the initial selection, you know, it's really important we have those correct contact details for you so we can let you know that you've been selected. But yeah, thanks, Becky. I think I'll probably commence with the rest of the presentation, and hopefully we can pick up some questions at the end. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Becky. Okay, so I'm just going to move into the CPD profile. So as mentioned, we now have an online platform. So in a way, it's a lot more simpler in the sense of that if you are selected, there's already an online system. So within that system, it is broken into 4 parts for you, which just makes it a lot easier. And on there is guidance on each page to say this is what we need from you on this actual page. So we've had good feedback that that's been a lot easier to complete. So mainly the first part, which I would encourage you to do first if you are selected, is to either upload or input your list of activities for the 2-year period. Anything outside of your cycle will not be considered, so it does need to be for that 2-year period. And as I say, you're able to upload that. So for example, I know some of these online systems, if you've been using an online system and you're inputting your CPD, a lot of them do allow you to kind of download that into maybe a PDF or an Excel or something along those lines. And we've built our system so it's very easy for you to just kind of click and upload and put that into the system. Alternatively, you can type in each activity with a start and end date and a description of what the activity is. So that either or is absolutely fine. The other part of your profile is a summary of your recent work. So what this means is we say approximately 500 words. There's no penalties or punishments if it's under or below. It's just to give you an idea of what we're expecting from you. And this is where you're going to kind of be telling the assessors about who you are. They won't have any more information than only the information you give in the profile. So it's important you talk about your role, what you do within your role, your responsibilities, thinking about who your stakeholders are. Do you have anything coming up, like I say, some additional roles coming up that your CPD, you know, that you're currently do relates to? So tell the assessors, you know, details about who you are as a professional. We then go into kind of the statement of how your standards are meeting the standards, and we say this is about 1,500 words. Again, it can be under or below. Definitely no punishment. It's just to give you an idea. And if you remember, I mentioned in this section, this is where you're going to start thinking about, you know, have a look at your data list, pick out your 4 to 6 examples, make sure they're a mixture. So don't just pick out kind of 6 fancy courses you might have gone on or 6 pieces of self-directed. Really try to do a mixture in your 4 to 6. And then, you know, this is where the reflection starts to come in. Start to think about how did it benefit you? How did it benefit your service user? And in doing that for each of those activities, you're addressing how you meet standards 3 and 4. So you can start to see how the profile is starting to build up now and relate to the standards. So just to recap, list of activities for the last 2 years, that's demonstrating how you meet standard 1. Obviously, your summary of recent work just helps the assessors know who you are and what you do. And then also the list also shows a mixture of learning, so that helps you then meet standard 2. And then within standards 3 and 4, that can be demonstrated within your statement. So as I say, you can start to see how the picture's starting to build up now. So really think about how those activities have benefited you and your service user. And then lastly, supporting evidence for those examples. So if you picked 5, for example, you would need to evidence those 5 you've mentioned in your statement. And then lastly, you would submit your profile. So in that would be demonstrating you meet all of the CPD standards. So I really hope now I've explained that it's kind of explained it's not as big a deal as maybe some people might think. And I know it can be quite daunting, but hopefully that's reassured you that, you know, it's not this massively overwhelming task. And, you know, I really hope that has reassured you a bit. So I just want to talk about, obviously, we can't ignore the fact that it's been a very challenging year. well, over a year now, actually, you know, and we've all kind of been impacted in many different ways with obviously COVID-19. So I just wanted to give some tips on completing audit following COVID-19. So I have also written a blog, which when we send the slides through, there'll be a link in there so you can have a read of that, which goes into a lot more detail. But just to kind of recap, reflect on your self-directed learning through the pandemic. So you might find you did do a bit more self-directed learning through the pandemic than you may have done before, just because obviously of time and availability, and things like attending a course may have taken a back burner, which we completely understand. Or actually there might be things you've done within the COVID where you went on certain training related to the pandemic, which again would contribute to your CPD. So just a second point there, reflect on training through the pandemic. So it could be that you went on further training for PPE, for example, and again that would all contribute to your CPD. So we just start thinking about what you've achieved in kind of the last 2 years, but in particular obviously during this time of COVID. Don't struggle to fill in the COVID gap. So rule of thumb is if there are any gaps larger than 3 consecutive months, they need to be explained. So this still applies even during the COVID period. And if you find that there has been a gap larger than 3 consecutive months where no CPD had taken place, and it may be for a number of different reasons, just ensure you explain that within your profile so the assessors are aware. Don't record all your work activities. So if you attend a team meeting every week, we don't need to know that. That is kind of part and parcel of your job role. However, if from that team meeting a piece of work came out that you shared an incident that happened, and you shared some points of how to do things better, and that was documented, that well could be part of your CPD. So just thinking about what's CPDs, what's your kind of your everyday working activities. So don't limit yourself. So what we mean by that is there's probably things you have actually done that you don't realise are CPD, and actually they are. So hopefully this presentation just is a bit thought-provoking in the sense of, ask yourself some questions. Did you learn anything from it? Did it benefit you? Did anything change following your CPD? Did it then in turn have a benefit to your service users? And if you start asking these questions, you'll probably find that some activities you've carried out definitely contribute to your CPD. Or on the flip side, it may be that you didn't get much from it, but what it has done is reinforce what you're doing is up to date. Even that within itself does contribute to your CPD, because it's showing, it's ensuring that you are still working safely and effectively. And show how your CPD meets the standards clearly. So, if you are audited, as I mentioned in the profile before, just breaking it down into kind of 6 examples of CPD activities, having your list, explaining any gaps, ensuring you provide your evidence, all these things will kind of contribute to you meeting those standards. And as I say, we have got a blog. The other thing I do want to say is that, from our perspective, we do want to support you as much as possible. So if you do find you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, I know workloads at the moment have increased. People are working under an immense amount of pressure. So for example, if it's something you feel like you need some support, we can always offer support and talk through the audit or the profile with you. Or alternatively, if it's, you feel you might need a little bit more time, we deal with these on case-by-case cases, but it's something we can always provide if needed. So just basically don't bury your head in the sand if you're selected. If you are and you're worried, reach out to us and we will do our best to support you and reassure you in this process. Just moving on, I'm just going to get up just a very simple diagram just to kind of explain to you how the process runs in parallel with the renewal process. So CPD and renewal are 2 separate processes, but do, as I mentioned, run in parallel with each other and do have the same deadlines. So what I would encourage you to do, if you are selected for CPD, the communication for CPD is completely separate to renewals. So just to bear that in mind. The renewal process, it's obviously a lot quicker process, and as I say, we've now got our online system for renewal, which some of you may have used. I do encourage you renew your registration as soon as you can, because it's really important you renew, because obviously, as some of you may know, if you don't, you will then come off the register if you're not renewed by the deadline. So I always say get your renewal kind of out of the way, and then obviously you can focus on your CPD because you have that 3-month window to do your CPD. So just kind of in summary, very briefly, you're selected, obviously you'll submit your profile. We assess it, we say for first decision to around 8 to 12 weeks. We do try and turn them around a lot quicker if we can in terms of receiving your first decision. And then hopefully that would be that obviously your standards are met. So that's just to give you an idea of the renewal process, obviously, the CPD process. So deferrals. So I spoke earlier just around obviously support and not burying your head in the sand, reaching out to us if you do need support. So you may find that you get that email and you think, oh gosh, now's a terrible time. For example, in the last 2 years, you may have had some ill health or unfortunately a bereavement, or you may have been on maternity leave. It could be for a number of different reasons. There is something called deferral, which you can submit a deferral request via the same online system. We do ask that you provide details of why you're requesting a deferral along with evidence. So if it is maternity leave, you may want to attach something like a MAP B1 certificate, or if it's long-term sick, it may be that you have a fit note or a supporting letter from your employer. Again, just some examples that we're given here. If you are deferred, and again, these are dealt with case by case, so your deferral will be looked at and a decision will be made. If you are deferred, you will automatically be selected for the next audit. And it ultimately is your choice to put in that deferral request. What I will say is that we don't tend to accept deferrals on the basis of, things are really busy. Because we do understand across all of our 15 professions, you're in a very extremely high demanding jobs. They are very busy. So that doesn't tend to be a reason for deferral. And we feel the 3 months would be sufficient to submit a profile. However, with that said, we do offer support. And if you feel you need a little bit more time, something like an extension can be arranged as opposed to a deferral. So just to bear that in mind. So I just wanted to briefly talk to you about audit outcomes. Now, this is kind of just a snippet of a 2-year period of how CPD went. And it paints a really positive picture, and I just thought I wanted to share it with you just so, again, to kind of reassure you that as you can see, nearly 80% of those selected for audit over a 2-year period were accepted. Just nearly almost 12% were deferred. And this is across 16 different professions at the time, because we had social workers. I think this is covering the 2017-19 period. So yeah, we have, and then you have your deregistered, so those that may not have, maybe retiring and things like that. So they asked to come off the register. And then we have just a small amount of 3% who didn't renew and therefore came off the register. At the time of capturing this, we did have just 7 registrants still under assessment, and that could be for a number of different reasons. And as you can see here, under 1% were removed. So this was the key message I kind of wanted to get across to everyone watching today, because I know there can be the whole, well, HCPC can take you off the register if you don't do your CPD. Now, what I just wanted to clarify is, yes, there's 2 scenarios where someone might be removed for CPD reasons, one being they don't engage and the other being they don't meet the standards. However, with this said, what I would like to just stress is that if you don't engage, we do provide sufficient amount of time. We do also send out, reminders and chasers. And for someone to be removed for not engaging, they would really need to not be engaging at all with us, and it would have been with us with many tries to try to reach out to them. So this is why I say it's really important to keep your contact details up to date, and also not to bury your head in the sand, as in, please don't ignore us, because it's the worst thing that you can do. So just because things would just get worse. So just keep in contact with us and we can support you. In terms of not meeting the standards, just to clarify, because I know sometimes there's some, I don't want to call them rumours, but, we get said, oh, if I don't meet it, I get completely, struck off the register straight away. Well, no, that's not true, because if you are assessed and there are shortfalls in meeting the standards, what will happen is we will give you the opportunity to do further information, which means we'll let you know, the assessors will let you know where there's shortfalls in meeting the standards, and then you'll be given an opportunity to then provide more information, and that can happen several times if needed. Most of the time, most profiles are accepted first time, and if they're not, they go to further information just once, and then the registrant tends to provide the information the assessor is looking for. If it gets to a stage where it's clear that a registrant does not meet the standards, despite several opportunities to provide further information, we may well give them something called further time, which is what I call as a bit of a get out of a jail card, in that we'll give you an additional 3 months to go away and do CPD in the areas and where there's shortfalls. And it's only at this point then, if you then submit your information for the 3 months and you still don't meet the standards, that you may then be removed. So this is why the numbers you can see here under 1%, it's very small numbers, because we will, as a regulator, do our utmost to ensure, you know, we support you. The last thing we want to do is take you off the register. So I just want to reassure and get that message across to everyone watching today. So resources and information available. I just wanted to get those up. So we have tons of information on our website. So it's just our normal hcpc-uk.org/CPD. On there, you will find we've got our CPD booklet and your registration. This involves information, anything and everything to do with CPD. So do have a read of that booklet if you haven't. We also have some sample profiles. So although the layout's changed now in terms of those profiles because it's moved online, the details, content within those profiles are still relevant, and you may find them really useful for them to give you an idea of what we're looking for, or just a starting point. Also, if you are selected, we do send out a booklet if you are selected of just how to complete your CPD. But also we have really great videos online of kind of, you know, we have obviously the paper version, we also have the video version because we know people learn in different ways. So yeah, just around how to use the system, you know, how to upload your profile, how to defer if you need to. So tons and tons and tons of information online, which we hope you will find useful. So just to recap before we kind of move into the Q&A, first of all, I really hope you found that useful. And I just want to say, obviously, I know we got asked a question before, but those selected for audit will receive an email and letter. This is separate to your renewal invitation. You can continue to practice during the audit process. So when what we mean by that is if you submit your profile and it's being assessed, you remember me saying about the 8 to 12 weeks, during that period, your registration remains the same and you can continue to practice as normal. Don't forget your dated list within the system. And again, the system's really useful because it won't let you submit an incomplete profile per se. So if you haven't uploaded or inputted a dated list, it doesn't actually let you submit, and it will say to you that this is missing. So that's really useful. Gaps of 3 or more consecutive months will need to be explained, as I mentioned before. And please don't send us any identifiable information. So if you do have any service usernames within any of the evidence, for example, that you're submitting, please ensure you redact that before sending that to us. So these are kind of the key points to remember. And as I say, I just want to, again, just reassure that if you are selected and you are worried about anything, to definitely reach out to us, and we can obviously offer as much support as possible. So I've actually finished the presentation 5 minutes early, which is great. So it gives a little bit more time for questions. So probably, Becky, do you have any, hopefully some more questions have come in and I can answer them.
Yes, we do. We have quite a few questions. So
brilliant.
Thank you to everyone who's asked one. Hopefully we've got back to some of them, and we'll be continuing to do that, especially for the more specific ones. But moving to ones that were like popular or ones that we think that people might benefit from knowing the answers to. One simple one to start with is just, if we are selected to submit, what date will we know by?
Okay, so normally the renewal goes out kind of on the first day of when the window opens. The CPD email to notify you, which probably lands sooner than the letters, just because obviously a post, we normally say like within the week. So if it's kind of like, for example, the 1st of July, we normally try to get that email out within that first week. So I normally, as rule of thumb, just to be on the safe side, say, within 10 working days of when your renewal opens, if you've not heard anything about CPD, you can probably take a bit of a breather to think, I've not been selected. However, please ensure you have your contact details up to date, because it could be that you have been, but we don't have the correct email or address for you. So yeah, hopefully that answers that one.
Perfect, thanks, Nat. Okay, so the next one that hopefully this will also be beneficial for people. CPD profiles, are they needed just to be completed only if we're selected?
Yeah, that's correct. So you won't be able to complete a profile on our online system unless you have been selected. And we don't provide kind of any assessments from the assessor unless you have actually been selected. So yeah, it would only be if you've been selected.
Perfect, thank you. So examples of evidence, this has actually already been answered, but we just thought it might be useful for people to know. Are there some of those on our website?
Yeah, we have actually quite a long list of the different types of CPD evidence and CPD activities on our website, and it's also within the CPD and registration booklet as well. So yeah, I would encourage that after this webinar that you definitely take a look at those. And again, just to stress, that's not an exhaustive list. It's just to give you some ideas. So it doesn't mean that if you have something different that it's wrong. It's just kind of more thought provoking to have a look at a list and think, oh yeah, that's actually could be a piece of evidence.
Thank you. Right, so we've had quite a few around maternity leave and touching on sort of sick leave as well. Obviously with the pandemic, that's really relevant. So I guess one that might summarise them all is there an expectation to continue building or compiling CPD while you're on maternity leave?
We understand that, your hands are probably really full when you're on maternity leave, so there isn't, and this is why this is, one of the reasons for deferral. So we don't expect you to do your CPD while you're on maternity leave. I mean, by all means, if you want to. So, I mean, some of our residents have said, look, when I'm on my maternity leave, I'm still want to keep my skills and knowledge up to date, but they might not be doing as much as they would have been when working. That's completely fine, and great if you want to do that, but we don't expect that from you. We know you've got a lot probably going on at that time and with a new baby, etc. So yeah, you're not expected to do any CPD, and that's why if you can obviously evidence you were on maternity leave, that's normally quite good grounds for deferral.
And is that the same for sick leave as well?
Yeah, so during obviously sick leave, we know obviously it's a really unfortunate time, and we wouldn't expect someone to do their CPD obviously if they're not working and they've been off sick. We'd naturally want them to focus on their recovery and getting better. So yeah, that would be the same.
All right, thanks. So how much detail is expected in the evidence you provide for the various CPD activities undertaken?
So this is a bit of a tricky one to answer. I mean, in your statement, we do say around approximately 1,500 words, and this is the part where you're talking, around your 4 to 6 activities. So probably the best way to look at it is if you pick out 5 and it's about 1,500 words, there might be more, one of them that you talk about more than the other, but the detail really is kind of the ball's back in your court. The main thing is that you're detailing how it's benefited you and your service users. So don't be too brief. You will need to go into some detail, but we're not expecting masses and masses of essays. So this is why we give the word count to kind of just give you a bit of idea of how much. And what I will say about CPD profiles, it's more around the quality than the quantity. So just to bear that in mind, don't feel like you need to fill up the words if they don't actually, demonstrate how you meet the standards. So think about what you're actually saying, the reflection points and the quality of your work that you're submitting. So yeah, I can't give you a definite answer of how much should go into it, but there will need to be some detail in there. Again, have a look at the sample profiles because that'll probably give you a good idea as well.
Thanks, Nat. We've actually just had a follow-up question on maternity leave before we move on. So apologies to the other questions, they will get asked. But someone's asked, what about just after maternity leave? Is it 2 years of CPD needed, including that leave? So what normally happens if you've been selected and for
So it's a 2-year period. If you've been selected for audit, but for part of that 2 years you were on maternity leave, you may wish to, and again, it's your decision, to put in a submission for deferral. What I normally say is, if you've been kind of selected and you've been on maternity leave for maybe a year of the 2 years, we've had cases in where someone does still want to do their profile, for example, and we say that, you know, probably a year is a sufficient amount of time to demonstrate you meet the standards, because you could probably do enough CPD within that year, and obviously the other year is explained as a gap because you're on maternity leave. However, if it's the case of it really is case by case. It's difficult to know. Obviously, I don't know how long that person was on maternity leave, and we are mindful that even after maternity leave, obviously, you're going back into the working world and you're probably getting your skills and knowledge up to date. But what I would say in that, you're probably doing a lot of CPD when you're returning back to work, because obviously, you know, you've been out for at least probably a year. And so what I'd basically say is to put it in like a simple term. If you want to request a deferral from maternity leave, provide as much detail, the dates you're on maternity leave, with evidence, and we can then review it and do it case by case. There's no kind of right or wrong with deferral. If it's something you want to request, we will review it and take on board what you've submitted. So hopefully that kind of just gives you an idea.
Thank you. All right, we have another one. I had a different role last year, but was still registered with HCPC. Is it okay to include learning and development from this period, as it's still relevant to my current role?
Yeah, so absolutely. So it depends on if you are selected, it will be looking back on the last 2 years. So anything outside of the 2 years won't be considered. So don't include anything you've done outside of that 2-year period. But if it is within the 2 years, then absolutely include it. And we are mindful that particularly during COVID as well, we've seen a lot of redeployments, additional parts to your current role, taking on additional responsibilities. So we've seen a lot of that happening, and absolutely do include that. And there's a lot of transferable skills happening. Something you might have learned 18 months ago is contributing to a role now that you've been put in potentially because of COVID. So all of that is really relevant stuff. So as long as it's within that 2-year period, definitely include it within your CPD if you are selected. But as I say, anything outside of, so if you have a course coming up, for example, after the deadline, it won't be considered if you were to put it in your CPD, or if you've done a course, for example, prior to the 2 years, we won't consider that either. So just ensure it's within that 2-year period.
Thanks. All right, can we give some examples of appropriate evidence that represents IFT, peer discussion and supervision?
Yes, so we have quite a lot of these questions about evidence as well. And what I would say, when we say evidence, we don't mean like evidence in like the court of law, for example. So if it is things even around peer discussions or supervisions or things like that, it could be any of the notes that were taken could form part of your evidence. It could be, if it's supervision, it could be even something like a potential email exchange of the outcome of the supervision, and obviously the response maybe from the employee that you were supervising, or the student, or whoever it is. So just thinking about kind of those kind of things. As I say, it's not evidence in the court of law, just, even if it's some communication between you two on reflections, reflective notes, there's a number of different ways. It's quite difficult to know exactly what you've done within those particular scenarios. So yeah, they're just some ideas. Hopefully that helps. But as I say, just anything that evidence, and you'll probably find a lot of the CPD that you've done, there probably was some kind of notes or reflective practice notes that were written up after. Peer discussion, sometimes there's an agenda from the meeting that could be used as evidence, or there's minutes from the meeting, again, that could be used as evidence. So yeah, hopefully that's just giving you some ideas.
Thank you. And we also have about examples of relevant evidence for academic roles.
Sorry, because that cut out a little bit, Becky, did you say evidence that might be relevant to academic roles?
Yeah, examples of that, if you have any.
Again, it's quite tricky because it depends what you've done within kind of your academia role. I mean, it may be that obviously, you have meetings with your students or one-on-ones, and they're documented. So it could be some of your notes from you know, that are documented, some of the reflection that your student has learned from some of the learning points you've given them. It could be yourself as a lecturer, for example, you've gone along to a course to develop your skills, or you've had a conversation with your peers and your fellow lecturers, and that meeting's been minuted again. I mean, there's so many different types of evidence. I mean, it could be that, you know, within the university setting, you've attended a presentation yourself, or you've delivered a presentation to your students, which you've put together yourself. Also, another good one is research. So if you're delivering some information to your students or your members of staff or whoever, and you've had to do some research, you know, self-directed research online maybe, or via books or some, you know, something along those lines, you know, even just snippets of some of the, you know, documents that helped you contribute to your presentation could be part of your evidence as well. So definitely take a look at that list. It will definitely get you thinking about the evidence list. It will definitely get you thinking about what could contribute to evidence in your profile.
Thank you. Okay, when you say when you say that identifiable information not to be sent, what do you mean?
So, for example, one of the examples I just gave was kind of it could be some minutes from a meeting, for example, that, you know, you're submitting as maybe part of your evidence, or it could be that you've delivered a presentation along with someone else. So it may be that it has their email address and their name. So we would ask things like names, emails, contact numbers, and things like that are redacted. So whether it be members of your team, your students, I mean, basically the only information really we want to see is any information that relates to you. So you don't have to, for example, redact your own email address if you don't want to. The only thing I will say is if a document is in the public domain, for example, you created a leaflet for your students and it's out there in the public domain, it's on the website for anyone to see, then you don't need to redact that because it is a public document. But anything that's more internal, so email exchanges, minutes, internal presentations, any names, numbers, email addresses, we do ask that you redact those before sending it in to us. So hopefully that just clarifies that a bit.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, do we have to have proof that every month of the year we have done something related to CPD?
Not necessarily. As mentioned, I mean, we're not saying do CPD every 3 months by any means. Obviously, any gaps larger than 3 consecutive months do need to be explained. I kind of, again, put the ball back in the court of the registrant to say, you know, it is about finding time for CPD. And obviously, we do want you to do regular CPD because there's massive benefits in doing it. So what the rule of thumb is that any CPD that you do, document it. So if it is that you are doing CPD once a month, then we do ask you document it. I'm not saying by any means you have to sit and massively reflect on every piece of CPD you do, because I know that would be massively time consuming, but have enough detail maybe in your data list that you're maintaining throughout the 2 years to know exactly what that CPD was and what you maybe got from it. Because like I said, you know, you could be selected and look back and think, gosh, what was that I done? I can't even remember. And it could just take a couple sentences to be like, oh yeah, that was it. You know, so yeah, again, the amount of detail is relevant to you, but I would, you document it as you're going. I would definitely encourage you to do that.
Cool. And so slightly related, we have just one thing. What does it mean by a gap of 3 months will need to be explained?
So what we say is any gaps larger than 3 consecutive months where you haven't done CPD. So for example, if you did CPD in December 2020, but there's no CPD for January, February or March, and the next piece of CPD was in April, for example, obviously, you know, or there's no CPD being done in April either, and the next piece of CPD was done in May, then we do want to know why there is that gap. So it could be in that period that you had some ill health. It could be a number of different reasons. So it's just that gap is explained to the assessors so they understand why there is that gap in your CPD.
Thank you. Okay, is the dated list something you need to provide on the system regardless of whether you're selected or not?
Unfortunately not. We did have discussions around obviously the system and what you would be able to do on it, and there was discussions initially whether or not we would provide a function similar to some professional bodies where you can just upload a data, input your CPD as you're going and it forms a dated list. We did agree that we wouldn't do that. There's so many platforms available where you can do that, or even create your own Excel spreadsheet, for example. And the main reason, if I'm honest, was due to cost. I mean, obviously we're funded by our registrants, and to maintain a system that collates constant data from all of our registrants, it does cost a massive amount of money, to be quite blunt, and we decided against it to use the funds in other ways, in better ways for us as a regulator to support our registrants. So yeah, with that facility there, probably would have been a nice to have, but it's something that you can still use other systems or even maintain your own list yourself. So no, it's only if you've been selected you can upload your dated list.
Okay, thank you. And some other sort of technical questions. Is there a penalty for going over the word count?
No, there's not. No, we do have a maximum amount of characters in, because they're free text boxes, so you can type into them or you can copy and paste. I must admit, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but they're very large and it would take quite a lot of typing for you to kind of meet them. But in terms of the recommendation of 500 for your summary of work and 1,500 for your statement, there's no penalty at all if you go under or over. It's just to give you an idea of what's expected of you, because it can be a bit of a, how much am I meant to put in here if you've got no idea? So that's why we've provided that word count as just a kind of guide.
Okay, and we have another one that's asking, if we base the CPD profile on this presentation, would that be sufficient?
Absolutely. So sorry, because it just cut out again there, Becky. So if you just said if the presentation I'm doing at the moment, it would contribute to their CPD.
Well, I think the question is if we based it on the presentation, so the information inside it.
Yeah, their CPD profile.
That's right. Well,
yeah. So I mean, if someone is
whoever asked the question.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what they mean, but I mean, obviously the presentation I presented today would contribute to all their CPD. If they are selected, the kind of 4 sections I spoke about in terms of the profile would be quite evident when they log into their system. They will see the 4 sections which will relate to what I was talking about today. But if I've got that completely wrong, yeah, if there's a follow-up question, I can always answer that or after the presentation.
All right, thank you. So a minimum requirement for clinical practice hours. I'm just going to read the question out because there are a few specifics in it. Yeah. If a registrant works in their main job with a special NHS board, Scotland, but retains small amounts of bank clinical work, is there a minimum requirement for clinical practice hours to be evidenced within CPD? I appreciate that activities can be a mixture, however, not confident that CPD with absolutely no clinical component maintains current and safe clinical skills.
Okay, yeah, so in regards to the hours, the answer is no, we don't have kind of any set hours, and we kind of get asked the same question when someone works part-time or doesn't do as much clinical work as they used to. And some people completely come away from clinical work, you know, and it may be they go into something like academia, for example, or, you know, more of a manager role that doesn't include any clinical work at all. So, or research as well, we've seen quite a lot of that. So that's absolutely fine. I mean, the key thing I always say is as long as you're continuing to draw on your skills and knowledge, even if you're not doing clinical work or minimal clinical work, but you are keeping yourself up to date, you are drawing on those skills and knowledge, and, you know, CPD is forming a part of that is absolutely fine. So, you know, it's okay if you're not doing as many clinical hours as maybe you were doing before, but and it may be that then your CPD starts to change and the way in which you're doing your CPD and the different types of CPD, but that's actually fine, because we see that a lot. So it's just thinking about, you know, as within your current position, what CPD is relevant to you. Is there things you need to change the way that you're doing? And also, as I say, you know, we have had some of our residents completely come out of kind of the clinical world, but have maintained their, you know, to keep their skills and knowledge up to date, which a lot of it can be done via you know, CPD. But by all means, I do get a lot of residents saying, look, I still need to dip into some of the clinical so I can keep kind of the hands-on aspect as well, which is, again, is absolutely fine. But in short, there's no minimum or maximum requirement of hours of clinical work, which I think was the main question within that.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. So do we have any information on shielding staff who have been non-clinical for a time?
I mean, what I would say is if you're selected and you have been shielding, in other words, you've not been working, it may be that you were still doing some CPD, but again, it has been maybe limited or it's been difficult to do a mixture. Again, these situations can be dealt with case by case. So if you find you are in that situation, by all means, do reach out to us, and it is something we can discuss with you, because it may be that we, you know, you think maybe a deferral might be a better option, or it's something that you can document and explain within your profile, because bearing in mind it probably made up only part of the 2 years. So yeah, those are kind of quite case by case. So if you do find you are selected, do reach out to us if you want some support, and we can discuss what maybe the best option is with you. So hopefully that helps. I'm just mindful of the time because I know it's 1:30. I'm not sure how many more questions there are, but as Becky said, when we send out the slides, we will be sending out some answers to any questions that were unanswered. So I'm really sorry if I haven't got around to your question, or if I've answered and you want a bit more detail. We do also have the CPD profiles at hcpc-uk.org inbox, where if you do have any CPD queries, you can email in to us. So I think we'll probably wrap it up there, Becky, should I say, in terms of questions. So thank you, Becky. And I just wanted to move into my last slide to basically say, well, first of all, thank you for joining me today and taking the time out. I really hope that you have got something from this, if anything, just some, like I said, reassurance. Just on behalf of the Health and Care Professions Council, we just want to thank you all for, you know, it's been a really challenging, well, over a year now, and I know obviously with the professions that many of you are in, it's been extremely challenging. So yeah, just wanted to really say from us on, you know, behalf of the HCPC, thank you so much for all your contributing and all the hard work that has gone in. So yeah, just a big thank you from us, and thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Bye.